Morning. I'm going to start again. Good afternoon and good morning, and welcome to this event hosted by ETNO and USTelecom. ETNO is the European Telecommunication Network Operators Association, and our members are the telecom operators who represent over 70% of Europe's annual investment in digital networks and services. USTelecom is the Broadband Association in Washington, D.C., based National Trade Association, and they are representing technology providers, innovators, suppliers, and manufacturers committed to connecting the world through the power of the broadband. It's now almost 1 year since the US administration took office, and so much has happened in these 12 months. Similarly, the European Commission has put forward an impressive number of milestone digital files. Not long ago, the Transatlantic Trade and Technology Council, TTC, has been established. Legislation has been in preparation for the past years in Europe to update the rules for the digital economy. We face new challenges and opportunities together. And as we look ahead, there's much more to come. What promises does next generation connectivity bring to citizens and society? And what challenges remain for us to get there? What opportunities will the TTC deliver to the telecom ecosystem? And how do we forge together the future of the internet? We have a very packed and ambitious program with a fireside chat and an industry panel of distinguished digital leaders. In this first part, Jonathan and I will take the opportunity to discuss the hot topics of the day, with two prominent digital policymakers. But we also encourage you to stay tuned for our industry panel discussion in the second part of this webinar. And I'm very delighted to be joined by my friend and colleague, Jonathan Spalter, the president of USTelecom, also by Thibaut Kleiner, the director of policy, strategy, and outreach at DG Connect at the European Commission, which also includes international affairs. But I'll now hand over to you, Jonathan, to introduce Ruth Berry from the White House and to ask her the first question. And then I'll take the second one to Thibaut. Over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Lise, and to your team at ETNO, to our colleagues who've joined us here today, and to all of our participants on both sides of the Atlantic for joining us for this important discussion. And we are really, really pleased to welcome Ruth Berry from the White House today. Ruth serves as Director for Digital Technology Policy in the International Economic and Competitiveness Directorate at the White House's National Security Council. And she really has a waterfront of responsibilities in the digital space for the Biden administration. She's responsible for international data governance, data privacy, and other digital economic policy issues. And she also covers international telecommunications policy, including 5G and the elaboration of next generation networks beyond 5G. Before this sweeping role that she had been in service at our Department of State. And so welcome, Ruth. It's really great to have you here. And if you don't mind, I'd like to just start with a broad question about next generation networks. We know that the investment and the efforts that we're putting into next generation networks and partnerships with governments in the EU and here in the United States really hold incredible potential for both technological and economic advancement and social advancement of our society. But both at the EC and here in the United States, we have necessarily really emphasized the critical importance of ensuring that these networks that we're building are both secure and reliable. What do you see from your perspective at the White House as the key challenges, but also the opportunities in this space, especially given the emerging threats that we're seeing, both Russia, Ukraine, the Apache Log4 J, vulnerabilities. Love to get your framing for what are the key issues that you are advancing in this space.
Thank you, Jonathan, and I'm really pleased and want to say thank you to the host, USTelecom and ETNO for hosting this panel, and I'm looking forward to discussing these issues with my European Commission colleague. To get straight into the question you asked, because I know we have a robust set of topics today, the Biden administration views information and communications technology security as a high priority, including for next generation wireless networks, such as 5G. 5G networks, as you mentioned, will be transformational and will touch increasingly more important aspects of our lives as they underpin the functioning of critical infrastructure, such as autonomous transportation, electrical distribution, smart manufacturing, remote healthcare and telehealth, and many other sectors. But that means that the stakes for securing these networks could not be higher. And governments and telecommunications operators and network users should prioritize security when building out their next generation networks. The United States, it should come as no surprise, is very concerned about the risks posed by untrustworthy vendors, such as Huawei, who could be compelled by the PRC to manipulate, disrupt, or conduct espionage over these critical networks. To address these threats, governments around the world are encouraged to craft rules and regulations that ensure that untrustworthy and high-risk suppliers are unable to participate in providing network equipment and software in these next generation networks. And our goal is to work collaboratively with our European partners to jointly address these key challenges. The Commission has demonstrated great leadership in this area with the release of their 5G security risk assessment and toolbox. And I also want to say that fundamental to our work is ensuring the security of the entire ICT network ecosystem. So this doesn't just mean the wireless networks, but also subsea cables, data centers, and the other components of the internet that form the backbone of our digital economy. One key challenge is that the telecommunications supply chain is heavily concentrated, which reduces competition and innovation and drives up costs. Huawei has been able to offer telecommunications equipment at a significantly lower cost than that of other vendors, largely due to market distorting practices. However, this lower cost is frequently a key factor driving countries' decisions about who can participate in their ICT networks. And so it's critical that the US and Europe work together to promote a vibrant and diverse ecosystem for telecommunications suppliers. This includes support for open interoperable network approaches like open radio access network technologies, commonly referred to as Open RAN, that promise to increase vendor diversity and market competition and can lower costs and improve security. We're very much looking forward to building on the progress we made with like-minded governments in agreeing to the Prague proposals on telecommunications supplier diversity, which laid out a clear vision for how governments can support a diverse and competitive supply chain. And we look forward to continuing to work with the Commission and member states on this issue, because I think, as we talk about the security being a challenge, I think looking at vendor diversity and innovative new network architectures really offers an opportunity. And with that, I'll turn it over.
Well, thank you, Ruth, for a very elaborate reply. If we look at it from the European side, Thibault, we have had September last year, the US administration and the Commission launched the TTC. And we hear Ruth mentioning some of the files in Europe as an inspiration. But from your side, how is this council going? It's been almost a year since you start working with the new US administration. So what's the European perspective on this new relationship? You're on mute.
I'm on mute, sorry. So I was just saying thank you for inviting me on this panel, and a happy new year to all the participants. It's great to see Ruth again. We had indeed a very good meeting back in September. And generally speaking, on the Trade and Technology Council, I would say that from my position, I'm trying to coordinate also with the colleagues in DG Trade this initiative, and I would say it's big. We have 10 working groups, and there is really a lot of work going into this collaboration venue. We are doing currently a lot of groundwork, and I'm very optimistic that we will not only improve our collaboration, but actually deliver very concrete benefits that we can show to the world, in the coming month. There is really a nice feeling, where I sit, because we have interlocutors that are, in the US administration, very competent, but also very much willing to share where they are and to also listen to us. And I think that it's a new feeling somehow, because the US administration is very forceful and forward-looking, and sometimes they have had a bit of a unilateral approach to some of these issues. So I think it's refreshing to also find through the TTC, but more generally, I think in the Biden administration, interlocutors who are more ready to listen, and also to somehow learn from the EU experience. I mean, I think probably we have started earlier in some of these areas to try and go deeper in terms of handling some problems. Ruth was just mentioning cybersecurity issues in networks. I think that we see here some progress, and in fact we have the privilege of having also European-based network system providers. So we think that to that extent, we are maybe in a good position towards the next generation as well. But generally speaking, we see a lot of opportunities to get concrete in terms of having common rules between EU and US. We may not have the same legal tradition, but what matters is that we avoid conflicts in terms of rule making, and on the contrary, that we join forces, because the rest of the world is moving fast. I mean, China yesterday was just publicizing somehow a bit worrying rules on algorithm regulation. There is a lot happening also around Singapore in terms of new developments for e-identity, for instance. So we cannot stay still. I think EU and US need to work together so that we have something that fits with our common values and that we can offer to the world.
Thank you, Thibault, and I agree. Many of these subjects are international, and we need to look at them together and work across the Transatlantic to make sure we mitigate any security issues, etc. Another international issue is, and something that has gained attention, that's a question to you again, Thibault, is that the issue on online platforms and applications generating increasing network cost. This has been highlighted in a report by ITU in 2020, but more or less at the same time as Commissioner Breton was taking action on streaming platforms, as he wanted to ensure that they would not impair the internet in the early phases in the shift to work from home because of the pandemic. Since then, we've had a debate, and this debate has made headlines in Seoul, London, and more recent an intervention by the European CEOs, the telecom CEOs. How do you see this debate evolving in Europe?
I mean, first of all, I think that the COVID crisis has been somehow a gigantic stress test for telecom networks. I mean, with people working from home, students learning from home, and basically, the whole economy going online. I think that the telecom operators can be proud of what they achieved. I mean, we didn't have a blackout like we sometimes had in the electricity sector here and there, and the networks were resilient. So I think it shows that at least as far as the EU is concerned, our regulatory framework, which has delivered the lowest costs for consumers, has not damaged the quality and the reliability of our networks. I think that you did a great job, as a ETNO overall, I would say. And I think it's a fair question, who at the end of the day is responsible for paying for upgrades on networks, and investment is a key question we have also in the EU. I mean, we've set these digital decade targets for 2030 with full coverage for 5G, for instance. This is a big investment and somebody will have to take the bill for it. At the same time, we are not keen to mingle into commercial relationships. So I think that it's a fair question, and I think it's a good principle to make sure that those who benefit from an infrastructure should also somehow contribute to its financing. But at this stage, I don't think that the EU feels that there is we are reaching a point where we need to intervene. I mean, it's different from what we are doing now at the level of the Digital Market Act, for instance, where we believe that in certain areas, regulating online platforms is ripe because we've accumulated years of experience. And it is the right thing to do at this juncture. But I think that for the issue of commercial relationship between telecom providers and platforms, we may not be there yet.
Good, Thibault. An ongoing discussion. Over to you, Jonathan.
Well, and thank you for raising that important question, because I think the underlying principle of it, and I'd like to talk to you about this, Ruth, is the notion that our international internet ecosystem is in fact becoming much more interrelated to various parts of the internet ecosystem, and there must be real thought about how you increase responsibility and accountability across the international ecosystem for ensuring that we can continue to make progress in terms of broadband deployment and the elaboration of a more modern approach to the regulation of our global internet. And this gets to my question. You raised the prospects of the TTC, and we're very, very optimistic that this renewed cooperation between the US and the EU, Ruth, is really pointing to very potentially good outcomes on technology issues broadly writ. But going to the idea of participation and cooperation between our governments, there also needs to be much greater engagement of various parts of the non-governmental stakeholders and responsibility and accountability for all of us to elaborate these more modern approaches that the TTC is in fact driving towards. I'd like to ask you, from your perspective, Ruth, what role do you see for stakeholders from civil society, from academia, and also from industry in participating with you in providing input into the work of the TTC and other efforts to drive forward the internet project in ways that will actually be sustainable and effective?
Thank you so much for that question. And it's one that I think is really important to the US government across all of our agencies. First, I just want to agree with what my colleague Thibault said about the real value that we're seeing with the Trade and Technology Council and the relationships that are being built, not just at the political leadership level, who has sent strong signals to both of our systems that cooperation on these issues and in the TTC is very important, but also at the technical level. There's just truly incredible exchange of ideas and open conversation and dialogue, and a desire to work together to find shared solutions for some of these challenges. And so that the US and Europe can help lead in writing the rules of the road for the 21st century. And so I think that's something that the US and Europe are closely aligned and very hopeful about progress under this cooperation. But key part of the Trade and Technology Council and the commitment that both the US and Europe has made is the importance of multi-stakeholder input across both the trade and the technology issues. The United States, as a matter of policy, is firmly committed to the multi-stakeholder system of internet governance. and to multi-stakeholder input into the rules and policies that govern the digital economy. And I think this commitment between the US and Europe is demonstrated by the fact that in our inaugural Trade and Technology Council Ministerial in Pittsburgh in September, there were multiple multi-stakeholder events within the sort of one-day conference. And I think that's truly a demonstration of how important it is to include voices across industry and civil society on these important issues. The Department of Commerce has also hosted virtual forums with US stakeholders to hear their views and input on the work of the scoping of the working groups. And in each individual working group has been tasked with establishing channels for stakeholder engagement on both sides of the Atlantic to ensure that the views of stakeholders are fed into the work of the working groups. And I will also highlight that the US government has an email inbox where anyone can provide ideas, suggestions, or feedback into the work of the Trade and Technology Council. And the address is ttc_us@doc.gov. And so this really is an open forum. And I know that this is a commitment that's shared between the US and our European colleagues.
Well, that's very helpful to know. And I'd also just try to point out as we continue this dialogue that multi-stakeholderism is very important. But within the internet technology innovation community, it's also very important to include the voices and the expertise and the operational know-how of broadband providers as well in those conversations. This cannot only be a project of internet and platform engagement. It has to be across the board, including broadband providers. And I think that that's an important principle going forward. Lisa, over to you.
Oh, thank you, Jonathan. And I must say on the multi-stakeholder approach, we at ETNO completely agree. It's an important one. And it's important also in the TTC to have all stakeholders involved in these extremely important discussions. But if we look at exactly multi-stakeholder and internet governance and the future of internet, I'm interested in hearing from the Commission where you see the internet governance today, because this is a topic which is very much there is a lot of flow in it, and there is a lot of new discussions. So where do you see the challenges and the threats here right now? And how do you see, and maybe this could also be a question for you, Ruth, how we can ensure a single, secure, robust and open internet, because we want to avoid the splinternets of emerging. So first, Thibault, and you're on mute, I think.
Yes. So I guess I should start. And to be frank, I mean, this notion of splinternet is very worrying. I mean, if you look at the benefits that the internet as a single infrastructure has brought to us, it's really something that goes beyond one single country. I mean, it is really something we cherish and something we need to defend. So to that extent, I think it's important that we also are cautious in preserving and protecting the basic infrastructure for the internet. In fact, this was also the spirit of one of our ideas for the proposed new rules on the Network Information Security Directive. And we also have projects there to make sure that there is security in the underlying infrastructure of the internet. We believe we need to make sure that there is no risk there going forward. And at the same time, from the EU, we are very supportive of the multi-stakeholder model. I mean, we believe that it has been proven again as a resilient and very flexible solution, and a solution also where we can cope with unexpected developments. I mean, who would have thought what the internet has become today from where it started, 40 years ago somehow. So ICANN, I think, and you know, all the governance and the infrastructure around it, I think, are things that we want to preserve. We want to make sure also that the Internet's governance forum maybe gets more resources. I mean, I would just underline that the EU is funding the IGF to a large extent, and we think that more should join in that effort. And we also are very supportive of the attempt that also the US administration launched at the Democracy Summit to also make sure that there are principles, you know, and it's actually something that follows very much for our own initiative on having digital principles for the digital transformation. In fact, at the end of this month, in January, we plan to publish what we hope will become a joint declaration from the EU institutions in terms of our vision for the future of the digital sector, in terms of values and principles. And this, I think, will feed further on our support for protecting the internet and making sure that it is as inclusive as it should. I mean, one area, for instance, I would just flag is that together with the US administration, as part of the TTC, we want to fight against internet shutdowns. I mean, we believe this is really an anomaly that governments could, on their own initiative, just shut down the internet because they have political opponents they don't like. And we think it is our duty somehow to preserve this common good, this internet infrastructure that was built and that is so much beneficial to the people around the globe.
Thank you.
Can I jump in and direct a question that's related to this that as a follow-up to you, Thibault, and particularly to you, Ruth. You know, the future of the internet is a matter of overwhelming importance to all of us, and not only on governance questions, but beyond. And to its great credit, the Biden administration has really pushed for, within the context of the TTC, the establishment of what is being called the Alliance for the Future of the Internet, a very important project. I understand that the Alliance is going to try to seek a collective commitment to address things like data privacy, data security, cybersecurity protocols, as well as establishing joint mechanisms and approaches to regulating major technology platforms, including issues relating to competition policy on the one hand, the abuse and misuse of information online on the other. I think it would be really interesting to know from you, Ruth, and also from your perspective, Thibault, where are we with this effort? What is its status? And what do you expect the role of industry to be in its evolution? Because I will be very clear with you both, industry, our broadband providers very much want to be able to participate in the iteration of all of these very important issues and working in partnership with you in doing so. So Ruth, what are your thoughts?
Thank you. So I think, you know, in the early days of the internet, many people were very optimistic about how the use and deployment of this technology would advance global communications around the world and expand the respect for the rights and freedom of its users and serve in and of itself as a democratizing force around the world. However, I think we all have to acknowledge that this optimistic vision of the internet is now in flux, and authoritarian governments and private actors are seeking to undermine and take advantage of the benefits of an open internet. There are emerging threats that were not envisioned in the internet's inception, such as misinformation, market consolidation, increasing malicious cyber activities like ransomware, the proliferation of internet shutdowns, and the use and promotion of the internet as a tool of state control by authoritarian governments. And all of these trends create a necessity for governments around the world to address these challenges and to recommit to the vision of a global internet as a platform for openness, understanding, innovation, and respect for human rights. So as discussed, to address these challenges and concerns, like-minded partners are coming together to figure out how we can work together to more effectively promote an open, interoperable, secure, and reliable internet that affirms these core democratic values, including respect and protection for human rights, but also a commitment to the multi-stakeholder approach to internet governance. The United States is working closely with the European Commission and other governments, as well as civil society, academia, and industry on the development and launch of the Alliance for the Future of the Internet. This effort was previewed at the Summit for Democracy, but has not yet been formally launched, but we hope to do so in the coming weeks. And the Alliance is really focused on commitments, on governments making commitments regarding their actions of how they will behave with respect to the global internet, and recommitting to the principles of competition, respect for human rights, multi-stakeholder approaches, closing the digital divide, et cetera. And I think once the Alliance is launched, we will then look at sort of how the international community, both governments and stakeholders, wish to carry this effort forward. So I would not sort of want to prejudge what the sort of necessarily structures that will follow from this, but it's really, the goal is to launch a global conversation and have countries work together to push back against some of these worrying trends. And I just want to be clear, we are not proposing to reinvent or supplant existing good work being done in multi-stakeholder bodies that focus on the technical governance of the internet, or the work being done to bring together the internet community, such as the Freedom Online Coalition, the Internet Governance Forum, or ICANN, that address both technical and policy-related matters. And I just want to speak briefly to something Thibaut said about ensuring that the fundamental infrastructure of the internet is secure, and that's something that we share the view of with the Commission as really important. But we want to be clear that the security and the underlying infrastructure of the internet should continue to be managed and operated by a multi-stakeholder community, and governments should be very careful not to sort of exert greater state control in a way that may align with some of the efforts by more authoritarian governments who wish to take greater control over underlying internet infrastructure. And so we're really looking forward to working with the Commission on how we address these security challenges without undermining multi-stakeholder internet governance, which is something that I know both the US and Europe are committed to.
True. Lise?
Yes, well, thank you. And we're time is running fast, but to make a bit of a shift, we have had last year President Ursula von der Leyen and Commissioner Breton emphasize the importance of a robust supply chain for semiconductors, also announced a European Chips Act. We discussed a bit on the supply chain in the beginning, but this strategy has an international dimension. And how do you see Europe and the US work together to ensure that the supply chains are reliable and secure on these issues?
I guess it's a question for me, and
yes, that's for you to go. Sorry, yeah.
I would very much concur with you that semiconductors or microelectronics is a burning issue right now. I mean, the scarcity of these products is really problematic. I mean, just like the digital transformation is accelerating, there is an increase in the demand for these chips, and it's across the board. I mean, it's from the Internet of Things that is really happening in Europe through, for instance, our building renovation initiative. Now that we put chips everywhere in the building to save on energy, I mean, it means we need the chips to do it. Just like our cars are becoming more and more autonomous, we need microelectronics increasingly in these products, and so on and so forth. I think it's just not a self-fulfilling prophecy, it's just a transformation that is accelerating. And for that reason, we need to have enough production of the next generation of these chips. So the Commission is preparing, indeed, as you were saying, Lise, an initiative on the Chips Act, And hopefully, the timing will be well aligned with also the CHIPS initiative in the US. So in fact, in the TTC, we have been discussing that these issues are shared. We also have the same issue that somehow we are depending from Asian production to a large extent for our industries, even though we are designing chips in Europe, they are not produced here. And our view is that it's not such a, I mean, it's a complicated story. So, I mean, we need also to first share information. And I think that's what we are doing, in fact, in the TTC with our US interlocutors. We need to understand exactly what is happening. Is there just an epiphenomenon that will disappear over time? Do we have structural measures? Is government intervention needed? I mean, these are all issues that we are discussing. And these are also elements that we will factor in our CHIPS Act very, very soon. I mean, the idea is not to deal with a small fix, but rather to have a structural and forward-looking proposal that deals with the research, with the production, with the ecosystem and the demand, and also with the international dimension of this industry. So we are very hopeful, I would say. I wouldn't say optimistic that the problem will disappear like this. We think there will be a lot of investment needed, a lot of work to cope with the scarcity and somehow the dependencies that were created. But we believe that together with the US, but also we are discussing this with Japan, with South Korea and Singapore, actually in our Indo-Pacific strategy. So we believe that together with these like-minded partners, we will find ways to organize a bit better, maybe the way these dependencies have developed over time.
Thank you, Thibault. It's actually quite interesting. We thought we would have a shortage of IP addresses. Instead, it's semiconductors. Sorry, over to you, Jonathan.
Well, and indeed, from our perspective, USTelecom actually co-chairs the ITC Supply Chain Task Force at the Department of Homeland Security, and we've been able to really do significant analysis of where we're seeing supply chain shortfalls, and it's not just in chips. In fact, we surveyed our members, and over 60% have indicated that there are real bottlenecks in terms of access to things like fiber optic cable. 60% of our membership have indicated that there are pre-order delays of at least 6 months. I've talked to some of our local providers that are facing literally 90-week backlogs in terms of accessing fiber optic cable, in addition to the challenges on chips. Ruth, really interested in your perspectives on where we need to go, where the Biden administration is looking to take us in terms of stanching this looming supply chain challenge that we are facing not only here in the United States, but as Thibault and Lise have indicated, in Europe and beyond.
Thank you. The semiconductor shortage is a key issue for this president. And from day one, the administration has worked to help manage this crisis. From working with allies and partners to expand semiconductor production globally, working with industry to incentivize more information sharing across the complex chip supply chain and demand chain. And tackling this challenge in partnership with industry and foreign partners remains a top priority for this administration. In the long run, the only solution to meet the massive increase in demand, which Thibault mentioned, with more chips included in more goods, is to make significant investments here at home and to expand semiconductor production. President Biden has called for at least $52 billion in funding to be appropriated for the Chips for America law that was passed in 2019. And we welcome incentives by the European Union to expand their domestic production as well, and look forward to coordinating regarding our respective measures with a goal to advance shared supply chain diversity, security, and resilience, and avoid a subsidy race to the bottom, as we stated in our TTC joint statement in 2001. But I would just also say that chips aren't the only critical good to the supply chain, and we also need critical minerals, printed circuit boards, undersea cables, and plastics and resins to support our supply chains. And through President Biden's executive order on supply chains issued soon after the administration took office, we are reviewing supply chains on a lot of these goods and working closely with our European colleagues on addressing these really global challenges.
Well, that's good to know. And I would just request that you also consider the access to and the supply chain inputs from the fiber optic cable community too, as a necessary input to elaborating the next generation networks and the core infrastructure for doing so as well. Back to you, Lise.
Thank you, Jonathan. I think we're actually about to wrap up now, because we're at the 40-minute mark, and I'm sure we have discussed a lot of extremely interesting things, and I know you'll do the takeaways from this session, but I just want to say my quick 2 cents is, all these discussions shows me that we, as Europe and the US, we really need the cooperation. And I think this partnership is extremely important. And I'm very happy to hear both Ruth and Thibaut supporting the multi-stakeholder model, both in the internet governance world, but also in the TTC. I think that's important. Over to you, Jonathan.
Well, thank you, Lise. And I'd really like to extend my appreciation to you and to your team at ETNO for facilitating today's conversation. And of course, to you, Ruth, and to you, Thibaut. Really glad that you were able to carve out some time to help this broader community understand the essential work that you're doing, but also the essential partnership, cooperative partnerships that we are forging with you in advancing our internet's future. Really is amazing to see how far we've come in advancing our collective broadband future together. I really think that this is indeed a watershed moment for the EU here in the United States and globally in making sure that the structures and the foundations for our broadband future, for the internet, are firm and in place. Just the last few weeks, there's so many auspicious signals. The US Congress just approved a $65 billion investment to achieve universal connectivity here in the United States through more deployment and affordability programs. And as we think about the future, one of the things I take away from our really good conversation is the need to really focus on what will be the appropriate, the successful, the effective, forward-looking regulatory governance and administrative structures that we need to think about. You know, we did some research here at USTelecom trying to compare the approaches, the regulatory approaches taken by the EU and the US in relationship to broadband deployment, broadband infrastructure. And what we found is that here in the US, what has been a more pro-investment approach has produced, in fact, twice the facilities-based competition for US consumers compared to the US. I'll put up here in our chat access to that report. You know, one of the things it did is it debunked the myth that still exists among some policymakers in the United States, that Europe's more intensive regulatory framework for broadband regulation has somehow produced better outcomes for consumers. And why do I raise this? It's even though we have different geographies, governing bodies, rules, and legal traditions and protocols that impact broadband deployment, internet governance, prices, and speed, we ultimately really are, as Ruth and Thibaut very well outlined, a global community of innovators trying to manage networks that circle not just our communities, but the planet. And in that respect, we have to be committed to deepening the kind of cooperation we're seeing between the EU and the US in a refreshed way. And our partnership on issues like data and privacy and cybersecurity and big tech and misinformation and supply chain, and all of the other inputs that will secure our global digital economy. You know, we see in our conversation today that clearly Washington and Brussels are loaded for bear. They are investing in that partnership. And so too is USTelecom and ETNO and the members that we represent. And this is, in my view, more essential than ever. So thank you all very much. I want to turn it over to our colleague Alessandro Gropelli from ETNO, who's going to moderate now our next panel with some experts from ATT, Twilio, and Orange. So thanks again to you, Lise, to everybody for listening. Ruth and Thibaut, over to you, Alessandro.
Thanks so much, Jonathan, for wrapping up. And thanks a lot also on my side to Thibaut and Ruth for being with us today. We are now ready to shift to our industry panel and hear a bit from the companies that are out there every day on both sides of the Atlantic to make the digital economy happen. By the way, to all the people who are following us, you can tweet on the hashtag TTC Telco to ask questions. I will look at them and pick up anything that might intersect what we are going to discuss. So good afternoon also to the speakers. We got Len Kali from AT&T, we got Pascal Roger from Orange, and we got our colleague Donald from Twilio. So let me dive directly into it and start with Len. Lot of inputs from this initial discussion with Ruth and Thibaut on the TTC. It's a new or renewed effort. It was a while that as industry we wouldn't witness all this activity and dialogue between the political level on the two sides, but also the administrations. So I wanted to know a bit, Len, from your perspective, what do you make of it as AT&T, and also, you know, we know each other for a while, you are around for a while, so I would be interested really in getting your appreciation on this Transatlantic Tech Council.
Thanks, Alessandro, and good to see you. And thank you for having me both to ETNO and USTelecom. First panel was terrific, really appreciate listening to it. To your question, the TTC, I think it's a really welcome and ambitious initiative, this idea of greater cooperation on both sides of the Atlantic, to drive the promise of greater alignment. One of the most encouraging points I heard or read was the USTR statement they put out following the Pittsburgh meeting, that the goal here is to drive common principles. The language was to update the rules of the road for a 21st century economy. And I think this is long overdue. And frankly, Europe is well ahead of the US in this regard. In the US, our regulatory agencies, particularly our telecom agency, its mission, its jurisdiction was established last century, almost 100 years ago. And this has constrained how it could go about addressing today's marketplace. If you look at Europe, they've moved forward with GDPR. They're moving forward with initiatives around the DMA and the DSA. And whatever you think of the individual aspects of those initiatives, the point I want to underscore is they are designed to deal with the marketplace as it exists today and not as it existed 90 years ago. You know, it's remarkable in the US, given the importance of data, people talk about data as the new oil. We still don't have a national privacy law that applies uniformly across the country or consistently across industries. We don't have a policy path forward beyond the antitrust laws on keeping digital markets open, competitive, and innovative. It's important, and my hope is the TTC can help drive alignment between Europe and the US and some of the key issues of today, drive consistency in treatment across industries, and also, as I think Thibaut was making the point, drive some concrete outcomes in these areas of great concern. The US and Europe, long history of shared values. This is an opportunity to reinforce our common interest and drive some common outcomes. So I think it's very welcome.
Thanks a lot, Len. I think you raised quite a few points that are suggestive of the things that I would like to discuss with you today. And I take away mainly two. One is about this TTC that we didn't have before, and now we have it, and it's a place to discuss things. So it's more about the governance of this TTC. And the other one, it's about also the content, as you said. Maybe Europe has been more proactive in tackling some competition issues, especially towards big tech, and now the US is developing the thinking on that. Let me start from the governance aspect, and here I want to bring in Donald from Twilio. So you guys are a cloud communications company, so that's the angle you come from. I wanted to get a feeling from you, first of all, of what do you make of this Transatlantic Tech Council in general, but more specifically, whether you feel it can be a place for non-governmental stakeholders to raise their issues, quite frankly.
Look, I think Twilio believes that it's a fantastic initiative where both sides of the Atlantic could look at how to develop a joint vision for data governance that reflect, the shared commitments of democratic principles, fair and open trade, and inclusive growth. And when we look at it, we believe that, there are some very interesting joint principles that can come out of TTC that can help companies like ourselves that operate on both sides of the Atlantic around artificial intelligence, shared objectives regarding data, objectives around data sharing, competition in the digital economy, and and trade norms that do promote trade and openness in the economy, but also take into account that we need to avoid what I'll call data localization creeping back into the ecosystem going forward as cloud communications develops. So.
And if I could follow up on that, Donald, if you were to put a ranking or any way to identify the most important area of action for a company that works, you are not a telco company, but you are in the technology, out there in the technology market. So what would be the most important or the single thing that the TTC could do for guys like you?
I think it's about developing common principles. Both the European Union and the United States will fall back on their national requirements, their national legislative frameworks, etc. And it's really about developing common principles that promote trade, that promote the free movement of data, that avoid, clearly as we enter into, or I guess we're a few years into cloud communications, and that will continue to grow and expand exponentially from over course. It's about really ensuring that what is done does not result in data localization requirements that brings a halt to the innovation that cloud can bring to the future of technology. Got you.
Very fair point, and understandable also given the line of business you are in. I would like now to bring in Pascal. Pascal is heading the Brussels office of Orange Group, that is one of Europe's biggest telecom groups, but he also has a recent past in the government because he represented France on technology issues here in Brussels. And by the way, we are at the start of the French presidency of the European Union. It's a rotating device. So every 6 months, the EU and the Council of the EU is steered by one of its members. And for the next 6 months, it will be the French. So maybe, Pascal, from your viewpoint, first a general comment on how you see this TTC, and then more on the content aspects. Len raised it. There are some imbalances in the online economy, and Europe, maybe with the so-called Digital Markets Act and Digital Services Act, is being a bit more proactive. So what does a big telecom group like yours look at in terms of hopes on the TTC? Over to you, Pascal.
Okay, thank you, and good afternoon, good morning to everybody. I'm very happy to be here, and as Alessandro mentioned it, I spent a long time of my career in the public sector in the French administration. I think the TTC is certainly the best forum to identify the problems that we have and to try to converge. That doesn't mean alignment, but convergence in order to bring solution which makes the flow of business, the interaction between the different companies easier. And we have already many examples. I mean, if we refer to 4G, even 5G, we mentioned internet, we see that we have the same views on the way internet should develop. I think there is also on both parts of the Atlantic this recovery package, the stimulus, the way to go out of the crisis. And there is also the green and digital challenge, where indeed on both sides of the Atlantic, I think operator can play a very important role in greening the network, and it's our common vision, I think. And here we have also issues like Open RAN that can help, but also because we can enable other industry to get in that direction and to create this convergence. Of course, there is issues where we don't go at the same pace. For instance, as you mentioned, the regulation of big tech. I think we are in Europe, and we are supporting as telco this willingness to regulate, to bring more balanced approach between telcos and operators on big platform, not only telcos, I mean all the operators on big platform. It's the reason why we are supporting both the DMA and the DSA. Yeah, so this is for me the real place to discuss and to see where we can converge.
Thanks a lot, Pascal. And you elaborated a bit on this DSA and DMA, and that's something that Len was raising in his initial remarks when he said that maybe Europe on this is ahead. By the way, I'm very proud as a European, because often the narrative here in Europe is that we are behind. So there are some things on which we are ahead, and the GDPR also is a standard for data protection that is also globally recognized. So I would ask you, Len, maybe also to be a bit more specific as to what are your hopes in Washington, in the US, on which areas should the US administration maybe become more active or proactive in tackling the imbalances in the economy? You are a big company, AT&T, but still, when compared to maybe bigger tech platforms, the game is a bit less evident than we would think. So I'm interested in hearing from you which areas are the most burning from your perspective. And you need to unmute.
There you go. Thank you for that reminder. As I mentioned, I think we need a national privacy law. You know, as I said, without regard to how you feel about specifics about the GDPR, it was an attempt to provide a privacy framework. We have several states that have moved forward with comprehensive privacy laws, but what you really need is a national privacy law that applies consistently across the country, but also across industries. This idea that you could have separate regulators establishing or separate states establishing different rules for different providers on the internet doesn't really make sense. It's consumer data. You want to protect it. You want to treat it uniformly. So I think that's a big area. The other areas you're talking about, more balance, I think it's really a question of just enhancing. Right now, we operate under an environment, the 1934 Communications Act. It was updated in '96, but it really focuses the FCC on telecom providers, and it constrains the ability. I'm not here to define what you may want to do to enhance balance, but I do think you need to look more broadly at the internet ecosystem and say, what are the problems today and how can they be resolved? I think Europe's been making that effort and therefore leads the US in looking at the question. And I think we need to take a broader look.
Thanks, Len. And by the way, this raises a point that also when I regularly visit DC comes up, which is what is the remit of regulators. So you got the FTC, FCC, and quite frankly, this is a sort of an existential question that we're tackling also in Europe. So who deals with the new, well, with the not so new actor in the digital economy and ensures that that it works fairly for everybody? Before we shift to other topics, I would like to conclude a bit with you, Donald, on the functioning of this TTC. And I would be very blunt in asking you, first of all, if you feel listened to or heard as a private interest or as a company that has transatlantic interests, and if there is any model or inspiration on how we can involve stakeholders better.
One of the things that always surprises me is that the more I'm in this sector and in the the telecoms, the digital sector, the more I learn, the more things become of interest, and the more models that I see that have different things that are interesting to pull on. And recently I've started to, we've started working in Australia in particular, and Australia has a very different approach to how they do a multi-stakeholder model and how they engage with their industry, whether it be pure telcos or digital companies like myself, through the Communications Alliance, that actually is, almost a co-regulator in which the regulatory agencies ask the industry to come up with regulatory codes that then become the law of the land. And it does allow a much more what I'll call nuanced approach, where, because the dialogue is much more perhaps fluid, and it involves people that understand technology, people that understand policies, and ACMA as the regulatory agency in Australia is also involved in those dialogues, don't get me wrong, but it does allow to arrive at what I'll call regulation that's perhaps less prescriptive and is able to deal with the various actors in the ecosystem, whether that be a network operator or someone like us that that's in the cloud communications space. So it's a model that I encourage people to look at as an interesting and different way of regulating the sector, because once ACMA approves once the Communications Alliance comes out with a code that's in essence written by industry, that code then gets adopted or gets approved by ACMA and becomes kind of the law of the land or the regulation of the land.
Thanks a lot, Donald. I think this is a very interesting point because it captures how this digital economy that smashes the old barriers, the physical barriers, but also the geographical and the barriers of sovereignty. It calls for different ways from time to time to tackle the problems that might be out there for consumers, for citizens in the markets. So interesting suggestion from your side. Here, I would like to bring in another topic that of course, as ETNO, we think is very interesting. There was a question before asked to the European Commission about the balance between network operators or telcos and the big tech platforms that create a lot of the traffic with streaming. And we heard Thibault from the Commission saying that it is a fair question to ask whether who benefits the most from the network is contributing enough. Then he also said that the times are still evolving in terms of whether action is needed from their side or not. So the jury is definitely still out. But here I would like to bring in both Pascal first and Len. And I would like you maybe to be a bit more concrete and more specific as to what the problem is in your view. So when we talk about these imbalances in the fact that network operators invest and streaming platform run their services on those networks, where is the real problem? Why is there a problem? Why should the consumer bother? Why should the regulator bother? What is it that you are seeing in the market that you think the others should see too? First, Pascal, and then over to Len. So we got both markets on both sides of the pond.
Okay, thank you. Now, indeed, it's It's a kind, for me, we have to consider what has been done with the DMA, which is a very horizontal approach, and what can be done regarding the specific issues that you mentioned between big content providers and our networks. And it's not only a question of contribution, because to a certain extent, the one who contribute are our clients, are the customers. But the question is the allocation of the cost. And what we are assessing now is what is the level of specific cost which occurs from created by this very large content provider. And we see that there are indeed very specific costs. We have to always improve our network. We have always to respond to the level of demands. On the top of that, there is also a green dimension, and you know how it is important today, both green and digital, because it's a free riding. There is no incentive, any incentive for this very big platform to reduce the consumption of broadband. They can use 4K, 8K, maybe tomorrow 16K. And it's all, of course, very energy consuming. We have seen even Mr. Breton, who called this big platform at one point, and I think it was mentioned during the previous discussion. He said that he asked some of these big content provider to reduce a little bit the bands they are using in order to allow and to allow, yeah, indeed, all the people who needed to work to make distance working to continue to do it. So there is indeed a problem. We are now trying to assess the magnitude of the problem, and the question that we are raising is, can we continue with free riding, no contribution, while there are specific costs which are come from the massive usage of these content providers. So it's our the reflection that we have now. Of course, we have to bring evidences, and we are working on that. And I would be very interested to hear what is your opinion, what is your views on that on the side of AT&T.
So Len, is this a thing on the US side?
No, I think the conversation in the US is very different. So I want to be clear about that. There's it's really not the conversation taking place in Europe. To the extent there's a conversation in the US, it goes to universal service support. So in the US, we're talking about things like extending networks into high cost areas where it otherwise would be uneconomic, helping low-income families afford broadband, helping schools, rural healthcare facilities connect to the internet. And then in the US, the thoughts around universal service have really come into the 21st century, that these should be broadband networks reaching everyone and all Americans should be connected. The problem is the way you support universal service in the US is very much a 20th century model. That is, you're basically legacy telephone customers are paying for the universal broadband service throughout the country. We actually at AT&T think the right answer for supporting universal service is congressional appropriations. The internet touches every area of our economy, supports the economy, and having the broadest base possible is the best way to support universal broadband. A shrinking base of legacy telephone customers just can't do it any longer. In fact, Congress in the recent bill, the IIJA, the infrastructure bill, appropriated $65 million for broadband, an enormous commitment, both for deployment and low-income funding. But everyone recognizes that money won't last forever. If you put it in context, industry in the United States year after year invest about $70 to $80 billion in broadband networks. So the $65 billion is an enormous commitment, but it's not going to last forever. So Congress has asked the FCC, take a look at universal service. What reforms are needed? How should it be sustained going forward into the future? And that's where I think the question comes up about the broader internet ecosystem in the United States. If Congress is not going to appropriate funding for universal service, should the FCC be continuing to look to legacy telephone service, again, unsustainable, Or would it be reasonable and appropriate to look more broadly at the internet ecosystem, particularly the largest companies? You want to be careful not to impede competition or innovation on the internet. At the same time, there are companies that have a very great stake, have been very vocal about the importance of the health of the internet and the internet reaching all Americans. And should the FCC look there? I think that remains an open question. I think it's something that's going to be considered as the FCC responds to Congress. There is some conversation of it on the Hill as well, but that's sort of the take of the conversation here in the US.
Thanks so much, Len. So different markets and different shades of the discussion, but still there is a conversation. Now, if I were a fair moderator, I should involve a tech or a streaming company today to get their views. We don't have that. So the best I can do is to ask Donald, what is your impression of this debate, if any? I'd be interested in having your take.
I'll give you my impression of the debate, but it's not going to be perhaps what you think that it's going to be. But reminds me of it's kind of the debate that has been going on for 3 decades, I guess. In the 1990s, it was about universal service for legacy or fixed line networks and how that was going to be funded. In 2010, we moved into data neutrality, and now we're in this debate that's happening now. And it's almost like Moore's law, where the amount of time that's happening between each phase of this debate and how to fund it is being shortened by half each cycle. So I'm sure in 5 years' time, we'll probably be having a different discussion around these issues and how to fund the next innovation that's happening in the sector.
Thanks, Donald. So this is an evolving debate. What's interesting is that it is going on in pretty much all capitals from Asia to Europe, UK, and the US. So we'll be tuning in regularly, I guess, to follow it and see how it evolves. I would like now to touch another topic, and this will be the last one because we need to wrap up soon, but that's important. It came up a lot during the first panel. It is about supply chains. It is about security, if you wish, and there, Pascal, I would like to bring you in on this one because European operators have been embracing the concept of Open RAN, and they have been working on that also as a way to become, if you wish, more flexible in how they relate to vendors more generally. So can you tell us a bit what your company is doing, what the European telcos are doing on radio access network when it comes to 5G, because it is such a crucial area for the development of 5G?
Okay, yeah, thank you, Alessandro. Just one point on the previous issue is that it's not only an issue between Europe and maybe other part of the world, but as you mentioned, there is also Korea, and we have to look what the Korean government is trying to do to bring a solution to this imbalance. And just one figure is that in Europe, I don't know how it is in the US, we have 4 big content providers which use more or less 50% of our broadband. So I don't know if it's the same in the US. I don't want to prolong, but just have this in mind because for us, it's a very important issue. Regarding Open RAN, I think we welcome it's an evolution of the network. We have to go in that direction. We are very active, as you know, not only Orange, but all the big telco in Europe to promote this Open RAN, this change in the network, which is indeed, we want to move from a closed network to something which is completely open, where we can really take advantage of the different providers. Of course, there are some difficulties that we have to solve. The first one is the issue of cybersecurity. We have to make sure that this Open RAN will be even more secure than the current solution in the market. It should be greener, and it's the objective that we are pushing for. You know that we have prepared with other colleagues of operators a memorandum to explain that to the Commission. We are on the way to try to convince the Commission that we have to go in that direction, that there is an ecosystem. And I think it's also, when we mention issue where we can work together, where we can discuss, TTC is a very good forum to do that.
Thanks a lot, Pascal. On this point of the value chain, I would really like to bring in of the supply chain. Sorry, I would like to bring in also Len to get your perspective. We know that Open RAN is one of the elements, is not one the only element when we talk about supply chains, their resilience and their differentiation. So Len, over to you.
Thanks, Alessandro. I agree with what Pascal said. I think the Open RAN provides us an enormous opportunity for technological leap forward. There are questions that need to be resolved. It's somewhat of a nascent technology, even still, when you think about scaling or dealing with all the use cases we deal with. But this idea of interoperable, disaggregated technology solutions will drive some of the diversity in supply that we really think is important. I think Ruth Berry did a wonderful job talking about the supply chain, the importance of it being resilient, diverse, and secure. And we think we see ORAN as a future opportunity here, and an opportunity we're all exploring actively. We urge governments to continue to support R&D, continue to support industry moving in that direction, acknowledge the roles the US administration as well as European governments have taken. The other point Ruth Berry mentioned that I think is also correct is implementation of the Prague proposals as a way to help drive open, interoperable, and secure network standards that I think are valuable for supply chain.
Thanks a lot, then. And then I would conclude on this 5G and supply chains issue by asking Donald whether you guys have an angle or something that is important to you on this, so that we wrap up this section.
Yeah, I think for us, it's really about ensuring that, we work in the cloud, so perhaps not as affected, or directly, I would say, obviously very much indirectly affected, but making sure that what doesn't happen with supply chain diversity is that it results in protectionist measures that result in, ultimately not benefiting consumers. And it's that balance that has to be struck to ensure that that doesn't happen going forward. And that would be, as a cloud communication provider, I think our main area of concern.
Thanks a lot, Donald. And that's interesting because with 5G, we know that the interaction with cloud is going to be very relevant and very important. So to wrap it up, I think that what we heard today is that the years of naivety on the internet are gone. So both Washington and DC are looking into addressing any imbalances and any issues that might have arisen in this internet economy and with technology at large. We also heard that the internet ecosystem is a very delicate thing to regulate and to deal with. So we heard that it is important to keep all stakeholders, from civil society to industries to governments, involved. We also heard that there is this privileged work between Washington and Brussels in trying to prevent things like the splinternet, and in trying to promote convergence between the two sides. And finally, we heard some more specific points on what telecom companies and cloud companies believe is important and should be on the agenda. Clearly, the imbalance between telecom operators and a big tech platform was an important one. The development and the future of 5G, the way in which we regulate data protection and privacy was another one. And finally, as we said, keep consumers in mind when you're talking these services, cloud services, 5G services, and also consider different ways of regulating, including self-regulation and other types of regulation. This is it from ETNO and the partners of USTelecoms. Because the Transatlantic Tech Council will go on, you can expect definitely that we will be back with more of this. I would like to thank the over 150, 200 people that followed us today, and of course, our speakers. So our broadcast ends here, and we will follow up with the recording and with the summary. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.